Hi everyone, my name is Stacy Schroeder. I'm the regional director for IMS, and I'm here with two amazing individuals, and I'm so excited for you to listen in to their great interview. We have Ty Bennett, who is one of our IMS educators. He's a serial entrepreneur and inspirational leadership expert, and he's leading our last program of the year on October 23rd at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. With us today, we also have Tina Cottrill. Tina is the Director of Claims Quality Control, and she's here to ask Ty some questions and get to know each other a little bit. So with that, Tina, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much. Ty. Thank you for joining us today and for being so willing to answer a few of our questions.
Yeah, I'm excited to do this and be part of the program coming up.
Yeah, looking forward to it. So let's jump right in. We have a handful of questions that we'd like to kind of throw at you. So as you know, many industries, including ours, are dealing with changes in customer expectations, the increased use of technology, and global and national uncertainty on a number of different fronts. So you use the saying, old ways won't open new doors. Can you share with us your insights on how we can apply that saying at Erie Insurance in order to be successful?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, your industry and many industries are facing a lot, right? A lot of uncertainty, a lot of things that people just have on their mind. It's taking up space in our minds. It's stress. It's bringing a lot of energy that comes into the organization. It affects effectiveness. It has a lot of different things that play into it. The thing that I love about the work that I do is where I spend the bulk of my time is with leaders. And if you look across the board at almost every major study, it shows in many indicators that the person who has the most impact directly on those within organizations are their direct leader. It shows that, engagement, commitment, happiness, all of those things are most impacted by their direct leader. And so I think that where we can move the needle a little bit, obviously we can't change all of the things going on in the world. Obviously, those things are going to continue to be in place. And, for sake of this timeline, the election happening in November, and even let's see what actually happens with that. That carries over to more. All of that's going to be in place. But I think if we show up differently as leaders, what we end up having is people showing up differently for us. And so that's where I think I'm a big fan of trying to control the things that we can control and recognize what we can't. And that's where I think we can have the biggest impact. And so my approach to leadership and some of the things that we're going to talk about is how we partner with people, how we lead effectively in today's world. Because I think some of the old approaches to leadership don't work. And especially with the younger generation, as this workforce changes, they want something different, right? They want a sense of purpose. They want a mentor. They want people to partner with them and connect with them. They don't want this top-down directive approach of leadership. We need to show up better. And so that's where I think we're going to spend the bulk of our time. And I'm happy to go into more of that right now. But ultimately, I think that's what makes the biggest difference too.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things that I'm proudest of myself is being a people leader.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah, so I can't wait to hear
And Tina,
more.
I love that you say that, because right before we started recording, you described yourself as like a very analytical person, right? And so
Mhm.
blending those two is not easy for a lot of people. It speaks to one, you as a person and that development, two, as the culture of Erie to be able to help people recognize the importance and gain the skills around that as well, which is really kind of the purpose of this program.
Yeah, right. That's an excellent point. Yeah, thank you. Um, so Ty, at Erie, we really pride ourselves on having a strong, positive culture. You just sort of mentioned it a little bit. Maintaining that culture is a challenge that we continue to focus on due to, as you mentioned, ever-changing demographics in the landscape of work. For example, right now, over 40% of our Erie employees, and that's including leaders, have been with us for 5 years or less. What advice do you have to gain alignment with that changing demographic and maintain motivation?
Yeah, that's interesting. And the reality is growth brings problems too, right? Growth is a great thing, but it creates some of these types of things where you go, okay, we've got all these new people and we need to be able to communicate culture and instill values. You can kind of see over my shoulder here a book I wrote called The Power of Storytelling. And we often apply storytelling to the sales process or to training, and obviously has applications there. But sometimes we forget that the stories we tell internally shape the culture and the priorities that we have. And so thinking about how are those founding stories being told? Are the beginning growth stories being told? Are people being reminded of what Erie was built on, what it stands for, why it's grown, why it's been effective? What are the values that have been important in that process, especially as you're new, that you come to realize some of those things? That storytelling process internally, I think, is extremely important. And in that, then engaging people in that nature. The culture is one of those things that's interesting because it's a living organism. It's going to continue to evolve, right? And all of these new people are going to continue to help shape that. Now you want to make sure that it stays aligned, but creating consensus. I believe that there's a principle in leadership that we miss extremely often, and that is that people support what they help create. And so, how do we create an environment in which people's voices feel heard? That doesn't mean that every idea I share is going to be implemented, right? That doesn't mean that I have the end all be all say in everything that's happening. But I have a different sense of ownership if I feel like someone is listening and that I'm involved in the conversation, right? And so creating an environment where that can be the case. And obviously that applies to the company as a whole, right? And structurally, you think about that. But it starts with those individual teams, right? Those supervisors that if they approach leadership that way and they have an open door and people feel comfortable with them and there's a level of trust, you feel like, okay, there's conversation happening here and I'm part of it, right? And then we can scale that and build that to a bigger level. So culture is an interesting one. I think sometimes too, we think about, I always love the quote, Howard Schultz, kind of famed for Starbucks, right? He used to say culture eats strategy for lunch. And when I look at culture, I've read, I don't know, most of anything you could read on culture, and people come at it a lot of different ways. So in one of my books, I talked about what kills culture, right? Because sometimes if you look at it from that framework, it's easy to say, okay, like what are the building blocks? But if we're missing something, if there's things that we're missing, one of the things that kills culture is not investing in your people. You guys obviously are doing that. That's why this conversation is taking place, right? And creating environments for growth, for opportunity, for learning, for development. Awesome, good, great things, right? But there's other pieces that sometimes we miss. Incentivizing the wrong activities, right? Because if we put an incentive out there and then we don't think through, okay, that shapes how we're approaching business, right? For example, right, this is a simple example, but if we're incentivizing the number of calls that a call center is taking, then quality is not the main priority in terms of how those calls are going. Quantity is, right? And so thinking through some of those things, there's some things that I think as a company, we can slip and forget to invest in our culture and actually hurt our culture by missing a couple of those pieces. So that's a long answer to a question around culture, because I think it's an involved process. And as a company scales, it becomes more and more involved because there's more and more people involved. But ultimately, I think if we recognize that it's important to tell the story of the culture, that it's important to involve everyone in the creation and development and growth of that culture. And then if we prioritize investing in it, I think, most companies end up in a pretty good place.
Yeah, I love your idea too of reframing it. So sort of what not to do and not just what to do.
Yeah.
That's a different way of looking at it. And I think that a lot of us as leaders are always trying to do the right thing and do the, but do we really think about what not to do? So it's an interesting thing that you bring up.
Yeah, I think sometimes asking, looking at it from a different lens or asking different
Yeah.
questions, right? One of the things that I think we think about, you asked about motivation, right? How do we stay
Right.
motivated?
Right.
There's a philosophy that came from Kurt Lewin, who's an organizational behaviorist, kind of the father of that field, that he kind of looked at things and said, okay, when we're going after anything, we can look at motivation, like why, what's our why are we going after it? But on the other side is obstacles and inhibitors that keep us from it. And his theory was the more important side is removing obstacles and inhibitors, right? So from that standpoint, it's asking a different question instead of like, why do I want this? But what's stopping me? Like, what am I missing? What do I need to learn? Or what are the preventative pieces? Because we can typically do something about that pretty quickly.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's an excellent point. Yeah. So, we talked a little bit earlier before we jumped on the recording. You're a successful entrepreneur, which is very interesting. What advice do you have for us as an organization as we look to stay innovative and responsive to our customers and employees? What is your entrepreneurial advice?
Well, yeah, that's always been my background, and so I've grown companies. I have a couple now, smaller size companies and some that scaled a little bit bigger. Uh, and for me, it's in some ways like a great um, laboratory, right? As I'm talking about studying some of these things, of like, I'm leading organizations too. And so I've got to put some of these things in place. And when I talk about commitment of my people, I've got to see if I actually have committed people as well. I think that probably the skill set that becomes most important in today's world is adaptability, right? Customer expectations are changing all the time. Technology is changing all the time. Like we could look at adaptability from so many lenses. Okay, so then let's talk about how do we actually develop adaptability? Because it's great to say, we need to be adaptable, and we all do. And I think we recognize that. As soon as I said adaptability, both of you nodded your heads. But then the conversation of how do we actually do that? Well, a couple of things that I think we can do. One, I think we can reinforce and grow competence in the basics. If we become really good at what we do, the adaptability requires confidence, and the greatest driver of confidence is competence. So if we raise the skill set of our team across the board, they become more confident to be able to handle situations as they come into play, right? So I think that becomes kind of the baseline idea. Second, I think we need to foster curiosity and innovation. There's lots of ways to do that. One of them, for example, is creative constraints, right? Because if we were to like throw out a list of, okay, here's 10 project ideas, which ones look like the most important? Well, it's easy for us to all knock down ideas. We're really good at that. Like, well, that one's dumb. That's stupid. That one won't work. And right. And maybe we come up with the one. What if we just flip some of those questions and said, okay, here's 6 project ideas. How do we make these work? Right. And we foster creativity, innovation, and put some creative constraints to it. Sometimes those are forced. Like the reality of the fact that we're using Zoom was forced upon us. We didn't use Zoom as effectively until there was a constraint put on the whole world. And then we were like, we're going to figure out how to do this. And we did. And we've become really good at it. Right. And so I think it's just a good example of how we can do that. We can strategically do that to build that muscle of adaptability. That's another methodology in that. We could dive into some of those deeper, but I think building that muscle, because part of that is recognizing and even reinforcing just a culture of learning and growth, because you're literally reminding people how we are doing business today is not how business is going to operate next year. We don't actually know yet. What we know is that from a value standpoint, Erie has been a great provider. We provide incredible service. We value uh, serving our customers need, like all of those things. Well, the application of how we do that's going to change over time. So we have to approach it from that standpoint. So we could dive a little bit more into adaptability in the program, because I think it becomes just vital for today's world. I think it becomes something that, you know, really anybody in any position, leader or not, is going to need to be able to continue to evolve with that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I completely agree. At work, in the world, everywhere you are nowadays, adaptability definitely.
Yeah, like it's interesting. My kids, you know, as I'm talking to them, they talk about like what I want to do and that kind of thing. And part of me is like, I don't even know if that's going to exist by the time you're there. You know, like
Yeah.
there's just so much change. And so
Right.
it's that confidence. One of the skill sets is literally learning how to learn, like that ability to grow in knowledge, skill, and confidence is a skill set that becomes requisite for today's world.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, thank you. So Ninja Warrior. So I love it. And I can't wait to learn more about it. What lessons from your Ninja Warrior experiences have translated into leadership insights? Can you share those with us?
Yeah, so I'll give it just a quick background. So I have 5 kids, and my two boys who are now 16 and 14 just became obsessed with the show American Ninja Warrior. If you've seen the show before, to the point that my son Drew was on the junior show. They compete nationally. They're nationally ranked ninjas, very, very good. I now own 2 Ninja Warrior gyms in Utah where we live. And it's been a fun sport to be involved in. It's one of the fastest growing sports in the world. And so that's been a cool community that just we've jumped into as a family. There's a lot of lessons in Ninja that actually translate. I think it's one of the, like, what I found fascinating is I was sitting there when they started, they were 8 and 10. And I was like, I'm having the same conversations with my 8 and 10-year-old that I am with CEO. Like it's the same principles, right? So I'll give you just a couple. I mean, one, adaptability is a huge one, you know, not even just in the standpoint, obviously they have to be flexible, agile, all those things. But when you run a Ninja Warrior course, you actually can't touch the obstacles until you're on it. The first time they ever try that move, the way it's set up is in the moment they're doing it, right? And so you have to prepare for something that you can't prepare for, right? You have to learn those basics and be able to adjust and adapt and pull on past experience to go, okay, I remember this obstacle and that kind of operates this way, and like apply it that way and learn from each other. So there's a great lesson there. Talking about adaptability and innovation, one lesson that I find fascinating, if you were to ask most people, like visually, like describe success and failure, most people would go, okay, success is that way, failure is the other way, right? I'm polar opposites. They're different. If you were to walk into this gym with my teenage boys and say, describe success and failure, they would go, well, they're the same direction. You go through failure, a lot of it, to get to success. Because when they go and try a new obstacle, they're going to fail 100 times before they get it. Or they're going to fail 20 times before they get it. But it's so in Ninja, it's like if you do a move the first time, they like brag about it, right? This is like, you know, I sent it on the first try. That never happens, like, because it's so rare the first time you try something new. And so in just from a mental cultural standpoint, to recognize that it's leaning into embracing failures. Now, there's different types of failure that we can talk about. You know, there's some of them are because of lack of preparation or dedication. That's not what we're talking about. Some of them are because of things outside of your control. That's not what we're talking about. It's growth. It's leaning into just outside your comfort zone to expand knowledge, skill, ability. That's where failure matters. That's effective failure. It's usable, right? That's a great lesson from Ninja. I'll tell you another lesson that most people wouldn't pick up on. So, you ever watch the show? the two announcers are Matt Eisman and Akbar Gabajimamila. Akbar has this saying that he would use, and it became so special throughout Ninja that you can, like, ninjas want him to say that to him. And like, if you watch the show, there's some ninjas that will literally like say it to him, hoping he'll say it to them. It's like the ultimate leadership compliment. He says, "I see you." And when he says, "I see you," it's like I really see you. Like, and sometimes it's because of the story that they come to the table with, right? Some of these ninjas have been through crazy things, and for them to get on the course is just incredible in and of itself. And other times it's because they just did something unbelievable, like saved this move, and they're like, "Oh my God." Like, and he's like, "I see you." And it's like, you could literally YouTube like Akbar saying, "I see you." And there's like montages of like hundreds of times he says this to these ninjas. It's the ultimate leadership compliment, right? To be able to like see somebody. Because what do people actually want? They want to feel heard, understood, seen, to know that someone sees their value, their worth, that they care, right? And so I don't know, I could go on about this for days, right? This is like but it's fascinating to me. There's so many cool lessons in it from that standpoint. I love that you asked that question.
That is really cool. Thank you for sharing that. So I love the title of your book, Partnership is the New Leadership. What nuggets can Erie leaders and professionals expect to gain from your research and experience in this space?
Yeah. So that's going to be where we spend most of the time with our time together. And where this came from, I did a research study with about 5,000 leaders in different levels within different organizations and industries. And the study sounds aggressive. It was a question. It was one specific question. I asked the question, "What do you want from your people?" Right? And overwhelmingly, people came back and said what they want from a leadership standpoint is, "We want commitment from our people." We could say that in different ways. We could say, "I want engagement. I want their best. I want them to do their job well. I want results." Like, we want commitment, right? We want ownership. We want people to show up and knock it out of the park, because I think that's the big differentiator in today's world. Most companies are no longer differentiating themselves based off of proprietary technology or products or services. We can all do similar things to what anybody else can do typically. And so the way that your people show up is the differentiator, right? What we're going to talk about are the approaches that leaders take in today's world that create commitment within their team, that create that level of engagement. So that comes into play with building relationships. How do we show up for our people? The level of trust we build, that comes into play with their involvement. How do we give them a voice? We talked a little bit about that from a culture standpoint. It comes into play with how our communication happens with them, right? What I call conversational leadership. We're talking with them, not at them. There's lots of different pieces on where we can look at how that happens, but ultimately it's those strategies, those approaches that I've found the most effective and relevant leaders in today's world are using.
Ty, thank you for joining today and answering all of these questions. I'm really excited to hear from you more on all of these topics during our meeting in October. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Yeah. Stacy.
Thanks. I will echo your comments. Thank you both so much. This was a really fun conversation. I know I learned a lot, and I'm very excited to learn alongside everyone at your program on October 23rd, starting at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And for those of you at Erie watching, I encourage you to make sure you've reserved your seat. You can do so by looking at Erie's LMS and signing up, or reach out to Jackie Callahan if you have any questions. Hope to see you there.